I want to cover just a couple things before we go on to some other anti-inflammatory types of drugs. So we've been talking about steroids and NSAIDs. And when we consider giving these drugs, the NSAIDs will have fewer adverse effects. We know the couple that we're looking for in particular. Steroids just have more far-reaching effects. So if we can use an NSAID as opposed to steroids, we will do that. In general, NSAIDs are not as effective in reducing inflammation, and that's separate from analgesia, but reducing inflammation. And if you think about why, it's because they act down lower on the inflammatory cascade. So steroids can be more powerful anti-inflammatories, but NSAIDs may be just the thing to do the job. Something that's important to know about using NSAIDs and steroids is sometimes we start off with steroids and then we go to NSAIDs, or sometimes we start with NSAIDs and go to steroids. Either way, we don't want to combine the two. And the reason why has to do with that inhibition of COX-1, which will inhibit the protective prostaglandins for the GI tract. If we give both of these drugs, we are going to really, really suppress that prostaglandin production, protecting the gastrointestinal tract, and that can lead to some pretty bad gastric ulceration. So going between these two, or even sometimes changing between NSAIDs if we're trying different non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, we will do something called in trying to have a washout period. So we will take a few, obviously with steroids, we're going to decrease slowly, right? And that will help then to have its own washout period. But if we're going to go from an NSAID to a steroid, we're going to allow a few days to a week. It just depends on what practitioner wants to do, what they want to do, to allow the drug to clear out of the body and to reduce the inhibition of the prostaglandins. And then we can start off fresh with the steroid administration. So the bottom line is we do not give NSAIDs with steroids. So some other anti-inflammatories. So these are not NSAIDs, they're not steroids, they're in their own little class. So there's a few of these that I'm just going to go over. And we're going to start with dimethyl sulfoxide, or otherwise known as DMSO. This is a very interesting drug. It's a topical drug, and it will bring in other drugs with it. It will also bring in contaminants. So when you apply this, you want to be sure that you're applying it to cleaned areas. Usually we'll be applying it to horse limbs. It can be applied to dogs too, but more typically owners don't care for this drug in their home. So it is one of those that has a very distinctive odor to it. You will know if you walk into a barn, you will know if an animal is being treated with this drug because it smells kind of like garlic or raw oysters, but in any event, it hits your nose and you're very aware of it. It does not act like steroids or NSAIDs on the inflammatory cascade. It acts on what are called superoxide radicals. These radicals are from macrophages coming in and going after things in an inflamed area, and they produce these kind of as a side thing that then can go on and transform and damage other tissues, kind of as a byproduct of going after the inflammation. So that by inactivating these superoxide radicals, it will prevent that secondary damage that occurs after the body is treating inflammation. It is an analgesic, and we don't know the mechanism of that, so it does provide some pain relief. This used to be a drug. I haven't seen it in recent years. I used to live in Arizona, and people would sell this on street corners. literally. They'd have like a little vacant area and they'd set up a tent and they'd be selling this DMSO. So it is available, I believe, over the counter as well, or somehow these folks were getting a hold of it. But it will cause skin irritation sometimes. So it has its own side effects of doing that. Because it goes across the skin, we want to wear gloves, and you want some substantial rubber gloves in using this. And furthermore, you would prefer to apply it with a some kind of swab or something like that, so that again it's going to be reduced from touching even the gloves. um, and so you want to really think about how you're administering this. It's not approved for use in food animals, and we can get hemoglobinuria. So what that means is we can get this dark, basically the red blood cells get destroyed and then are urinated out. The hemoglobin is urinated out. It kind of makes this dark urine, but that is only with IV doses. So this drug is also, even though it doesn't come in IV approved administration forms, it does get used that way, but that is typical that veterinarians will be administering this drug as an IV. There has been, in recent years, it's been shown that there are not great studies. We've had a lot of anecdotal use of this drug, but the typical thing that you all will experience is applying it topically to horse limbs to reduce inflammation. We're going to talk now about chondroprotectants. These are drugs that prevent and or reverse or have the potential to reverse joint cartilage degeneration, so used in arthritis. You'll see my abbreviation DJD. That's degenerative joint disease. It's an acronym for it. It's commonly used when talking about osteoarthritis in animals. So the first one, Adequan, has an ingredient called polysulfated glycosaminoglycans, otherwise known as PSGAGs. These are a part of the cartilage or a component of cartilage formation that attract water and add a springiness to the joint cartilage. There's hyaluronic acid or hyaluronate sodium, which is an ingredient in Legend or Hyalovet. And this is an ingredient that is in the joint fluid. So you can see the strategy behind these two drugs. Let's inject, these are both injectable, let's inject the components of the joint to help it to repair itself or protect it, because these ingredients also have some anti-inflammatory, local anti-inflammatory effect in the joint. And then lastly, we're going to talk about glucosaminoglycan, or glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate, sorry, otherwise known as Cosequin. That's the most prominent veterinary product. There's other products in this area. So Adequan, that contains polysulfated glycosaminoglycans or PSGAGs, what we're doing is we're trying to put this ingredient in the joint. It can go intra-articularly and it can also be injected intramuscularly in horses, just intramuscularly in dogs. But the idea is that this gets to the joint area and will promote new chondrocytes and cartilage. And then it does have some properties of inhibiting the degradation of those areas. This is a pretty expensive drug, but it's used more commonly in the horse world than in the dog world. And this is an FDA approved drug. Hyaluronic acid, otherwise known as Legend, is another relatively expensive drug. It's injected IV or in the vein. It's not been used as much in dogs again, but it is, the hyaluronic acid is a component of that synovial fluid that has a very lubricating property to it. And again, this is an FDA approved drug. So both of this drug and the previous drug have been shown to have some efficacy. And it is a drug that's going to go IV or IM, and so it has been approved for that. And then intra-articularly, it's been approved for administration in that way. Cosequin it differs from the previous two drugs I've talked about, which are FDA approved. Cosequin, on the other hand, is a nutraceutical. A nutraceutical is basically a food or food ingredient, something that is used to maintain nutrition, has nutritional value, that kind of thing, but it's not required to be approved by the FDA. The vitamin industry a number of years ago fought very hard to not have vitamins or herbal supplements and things like Cosequin to be approved by the FDA. They do have to be manufactured in facilities that are clean and have good practices. So they are regulated in that way, their manufacturing, but they cannot claim any medicinal purpose. They may allude to it on the label as may help with joint health or promote joint health, that kind of thing. But they can't claim to have proven it as far as the FDA goes. Typically, these products will tout that they've done studies, but usually they're not done against a placebo. So it's very important to know what the placebo effect is. If I had a population of 20 dogs that had arthritis and I gave 10 of them Rimadyl and I gave 10 of them a placebo, and a placebo is simply a sugar pill, it has no active ingredient in it. And I questioned the owners, so this placebo effect applies whether you are being given a drug to try or whether it's an owner telling you about their pet. And so with the Rimadyl administered dogs, chances are I would see about 70 to 80% would show improvement of some sort in their animals. And with the sugar pill, the placebo, I would typically see about 30 to 40% of people telling me that their animals had improved. That 30 to 40% is the placebo effect. It may truly be that their animals were better, and it might just have been a matter of some time that those animals improved. And just like you and I get aches and pains and they disappear and come back, maybe in that time period they disappeared for a while, or owners thought that they noticed improvement because they gave their animal something. Regardless of why that occurs, it does. And so any drug that is going to get approval from the FDA needs to demonstrate a higher percentage of improvement than 30 to 40%. It needs to be more in the 70, 60, 70, 80% range before they're going to approve it for being an actual drug that is doing some good, because it has to be better than the placebo effect. So bear in mind that these supplements are out there and they may be helpful for some animals, but we don't have the best data for them. Lastly, I'm going to talk about Tylenol. So Tylenol is not technically an anti-inflammatory. It's an antipyretic and an analgesic, though. It doesn't cause GI upset, so that's why it gets prescribed in the human world a lot. It doesn't promote ulcers or platelet clumping, but it can kill a cat. So a 500 milligram extra strength tablet can kill a kitty cat. We don't tend to use Tylenol in veterinary medicine. I'm going to let you look at this silly sign. I just thought it was crazy that they said no dogs or cats allowed. They just didn't want to discriminate, I guess, against cats hiking on the trail. So I want you to be aware of the difference between glucocorticoids and NSAIDs, and think about what you would tell owners about the side effects of each one and how you would tell them to administer them. So I will be giving you some questions about that.